Welcome to Create Your Reality, History and Practical Application of Magic. My name is Philip, and I have the pleasure of guiding you through today's adventure. And I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction of magic, a little bit of a come from of some of the things I've learned. And I also want to invite you to go along with it and actually do some magic. So we'll actually do some practical magic in this session as well. So, begin to think about what you might want to create. But before we go and do any of the talk and really go deeper into magic, let's start with thinking about what everybody that I know who's a shaman or magician does around the world before they get started. They locate themselves, right? They really make sure that they know they have their feet on the ground and where they stand. So not much you need to do for it. Very, very simple thing to do. So start by sitting comfortably wherever you might be and kind of look around the room. Take a moment to look around the room. And you'll see there's no saber-toothed tigers coming at you. There's no screeching demons coming at you. There's really nothing you need to pay attention to right now. So you can allow yourself to close your eyes or put them in soft focus, whatever is more comfortable to you. And nobody's going to be looking at you, so you're totally fine, and don't worry. Once we close our eyes and our visual information goes away, which makes up about 70% of what we usually take in, suddenly we hear much better. And right now, obviously, you hear the sound of my voice, right? But you also might be hearing some background noises, some humming of your computer, or some noises around you from other people. But again, nothing that you need to pay attention to right now, and you can allow yourself to relax even more. Take a deep breath in, and a really long breath out. Another deep breath in, and a long breath out. And one more time, take a deep breath in, and a long breath out. And take a moment to notice what you're smelling. Right, you might not be smelling much at all. You might be smelling yourself or the person next to you, or maybe some food or coffee around you. But again, nothing you need to pay attention to right now, and you can allow yourself to relax even more. Our smell is connected to our sense, our smell is connected to our taste, and so take a moment to taste what's in your mouth. And again, might be not much at all. Maybe some toothpaste, maybe some coffee, maybe some food, or other things you ate today. But again, no poison, nothing you need to worry about or pay attention to right now, and you can allow yourself to relax even more. With all our senses, calm down, see what you're touching, see what you're sensing, your butt in the chair. Take a moment to notice your feet on the ground, front and back, left and right, all four corners of your feet solidly supported by the ground. And from your feet, see if you can move your attention up to your ankles, to your shins and calves, to your knees and thighs, to your butt in the chair, solidly supported, to your torso, maybe straighten your spine a little bit, all the way up to your left arm, and your left hand, and your right arm, and your right hand, and into your shoulders and neck. We'll hold a lot of tension there. If you notice tension, simply allow it and release. It'll do it all by itself. Keep moving up to your face and all the way to the top of your head. And now see if you can move up even further. Just a few feet above where you're sitting, to the top of the room, looking down at yourself, sitting here. Every choice you've ever made brought you right into this room. How's your body feeling right now? You just went through connecting with your whole body. What's going on for your body at the moment? How have you been doing emotionally today? Usually it's an up and down, I'm okay, I'm not okay, I'm okay, I'm not okay. a constant back and forth. What have you been experiencing emotionally today? And what have you been thinking about? What thoughts triggered those emotions? What thoughts might have repeated themselves again and again? What about the people in your life, the commitments you have, the relationships, things pulling on you? How's that been feeling for you today? How did you experience your relationships today? And how have you related to the earth, to the ground that we walk on, to Mother Earth, to Gaia, to life as such, the biology that makes up our body? How have you been connecting to the root of life? And how have you been reaching out to the stars, to that which is above us, to the heavens, the divine, your genius, your higher self? What attempts have you made to connect with that today? No right or wrong, simply notice what's happening for you today. How have you been experiencing yourself up to this point, to this very moment, here and now? All the choices you've ever made, from how you reincarnated, to who your parents were, your genetics and epigenetics, to the nurture or lack thereof, to all the people in your life that have come into your life so far, and all the decisions you've ever made that brought you right here, right now. Again, no right or wrong, simply notice all the decisions and choices that have created this moment for you and everything that's around you, that you have created for yourself. And with that, take another deep breath in, and long breath out, returning into your body, your feet solidly on the ground, your butt supported in chair, your torso straight, and your body, emotions, mind, choices, in connection to that which is below and that which is above, solidly in place, so you can pay attention. Take another deep breath in, and when you're ready, open your eyes and come back into the room. Welcome back, and we'll talk about Magick now. And what comes up for you when you hear Magick? Right? In the modern generation, a lot of times when I talk to people about Magick, the first thing that comes up is those little wizards, or those old versions of wizards. Right? That always fascinated me. Since I was a kid, I was fascinated with Merlin and those old wizards and the magic that they could do. Right? But also when I was a kid, most of the time when people heard Magick, they thought about more like this, like sawing women in half. Seemed to be a very, very popular male fantasy. I think it has something to do with disempowerment or insecurity. But this is, by the way, how it's done. And I'm going to give away a few things today. So this is your spoiler alert in case, you were wondering. We're going to talk about Magick, but I'm going to give away some of the secrets behind it. But beyond this Magick, what about this other Magick? Right? The magic of Dr. Faustus, who's invoking the fire demon. Right? Or the magic of the witches dancing around in the forest, frolicking around. Right? And of course here the male insecurity comes in again, and they assumed of course that those women must be dancing with the devil while they're doing this, so you burn them is what you do apparently. Right? But there's witches today, right, that have survived that horrible disaster and have actually continued to practice some of those tools and learnings from these witches long time ago. And actually really ideally Magick is done together anyway, right? Because you want to integrate the masculine and the feminine in your ceremonies. But there's also something sinister about Magick, right? Something dark, something that's a little spooky, right? The idea that someone might, put a hex on us or put a spell on us, right? And manipulate us in some ways, right? So there's this darkness, and humans have always kind of been terrified of sort of magic and death, right? So there's something really fascinating here. But we've always practiced magic from the very, very beginnings, right? If you think about those cave paintings back in the day, a lot of them were actually not depictions of what had happened, but invocations of what they wanted to have happen, Right? So while our ancestors sat around in the cold, in the dark, in the cave, eating the last bits of rotten food from last year, right, they were fantasizing about that mammoth hunt and how they're going to make that happen. And it's going to be this huge, amazing mammoth. And everybody's going to be so awesome. And we're going to hunt that thing down and eat it. It's going to be great. Right? So a lot of those paintings are actually done as an invocation of a possible future. And the tradition of magic goes a long way, right? Even in Egypt, there's Thoth, who's most famous among them, who is the god of magic as well, in this emerald tablet, right, where he spoke about the truths of how to create magic. We find him later as Hermes in Greece and also as Mercury in Rome. So he comes back, and a lot of that knowledge actually was brought then back to Europe from the Templars, right, who also brought Arab mathematics and Greek philosophy to Europe. So he brought a lot of his magical thinking, and that was also the occurrence, which was actually written probably somewhere at the beginning of the century, of the Emerald Tablet, right, the magical scriptures of magic that give you all the knowledge of Hermes and Thoth. So the magician, magical line, and that actually to a great extent caused a lot of the Renaissance, and the new upliving of creativity in the Renaissance was actually that magical knowledge that made it back to Europe. And of course you had the Rosicrucians and other similar, secret societies, the Templars. After the Templars you had the Rosicrucians, you had the Freemasons, you had, different, later on the Golden Dawn, and a lot of small societies as well. Right? There's the Theosophical Society, which was a major impact of the late 19th century. Madame Blavatsky and later Annie Besant brought that also to America. Right? While in Germany there was the Real Society and the Thule Society and other occult societies that, Thule, for example, helped even like Hitler get to power. Right? And he was very fascinated with the occult and had a lot of occult research done as well. But that's a whole other story. Right? Another man that was at the beginning of last century that was influenced by a lot of these things was Rudolf Steiner, who wrote a beautiful book called Umrisse der Geheimwissenschaften, outline of secret societies, right, of the occult. A lot of very good synthesis, and a lot of his work is a synthesis as well. And I'm kind of in that lineage of people who try and synthesize that knowledge. In Berlin, in the meantime, there was the Ordo Templi Orientis that started, and then actually Aleister Crowley became a member of it, and he kind of reprogrammed and redid a lot of the knowledge underneath it to his thelema, right, to his idea of magic, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But he was one of the most influential people. He also influenced Osman Spare in the UK, who was a secretary for a while, who later influenced Kenneth Grant and then Peter Carroll to create chaos magic, right, that kind of British lineage in that sense. In the US, the Ordo Templi Orientis had some interesting characters that attracted it in the lodge in Pasadena, among others Gene Roddenberry, who wrote Star Trek, and Ray Bradbury, who wrote Fahrenheit 451, and another failed sci-fi author named L. Ron Hubbard, who actually created Scientology as a result of the learnings he had in the OTO. And obviously that went a little wrong and a little too far in certain directions. And so one of the people who left was this gentleman named Werner Erhard. And Werner Erhard actually created the Erhard seminar trainings, and EST was very popular in the 60s and 70s. And together with LSD and DOD, it pretty much created Silicon Valley, right? But EST was created by Werner Erhard, and if you don't know about him, worthwhile looking up. There's a lot of really awesome talks of him and Buckminster Fuller that are available online. But L. Ron Hubbard was not a very kind man. He was a bit of a petty, jealous man, so he was really pissed at the success of Erhard. So he actually, created a whole defamation campaign against him, so he had to sell EST and LifeSpring, out of which came Landmark and MITT later on, which are part of my lineage. And the other person, though, that really, really was responsible for a lot of the works of Crowley's coming to the public was Israel Regardie, who was another one of his secretaries. He later inspired Christopher Hyatt and also Lon Milo Duquette, who I both studied with, as well as also Timothy Leary and Robert Anton Wilson, two of the people that I'm in the lineage of as well. And of course, there was Franz Barden, to have mentioned it in Germany as well, a Czech magician who was very influential, wrote a book called The Way of the True Adept, Introduction to Hermetics. Highly recommend that as well, right? Because he's a doctor and is very clean about his approach to magic. But I want to come back to Crowley because he was such an influential man for the 60s, right? He's even made it on Sgt. Pepper, the album cover of the Beatles, as one of their favorite people right here, the most wicked man alive. So magic, right? What is all this stuff about, right? Is there real magic? On that note, there's a very good book by Dean Radin, who's the head scientist of the Institute of Nomadic Sciences in California. And he actually looked at the last 30, 40 years of parapsychology research. Because, a lot of the protocols that we actually have today in science, things like triple-blind studies, actually came from parapsychology. Because they constantly had to prove to the world that they were really sound in their methods and that these results that they were getting, even though sometimes freaky, were actually making sense. Right? And he, in this book, looks into 3 primary areas. He looks into the possibility of influencing will on matter, right? The influence of will on matter. Can we create reality in that sense? And I will focus on that today. And then, of course, the perception of reality beyond time and space, right? Remote viewing or astral projection, where we can see things that aren't here yet or not here locally. Right? And thirdly, the communication with discorporate entities, whether it's dead people or spirits, right? The ability to communicate beyond the physical existence here. And in his book, he shows that in the last 30 years, ultimately, research says there seems to be something going on, right? Because a good researcher, a good scientist would never say this is proven or not proven, right? He would say, I have done these experiments, these are the p-values, these are my statistical values I'm getting, and that's all I can say about the matter, right? So there seems to be something going on, right, with these things, and all 3 of them, right? We can influence things, make things happen, right? The Stanford Research Institute did a lot of research on, for example, number generators and whether psychics could influence those number generators. And what came out was that even sometimes months after the initial results were printed, because nobody had observed them yet, I come back to that observer effect in quantum physics, but nobody had observed them yet. And then even months later, they were actually able to influence the outcome of a random number generator with statistical significance. So there seems to be something going on. Right? Similarly with perception of reality beyond time and space, the military has done research on remote viewing, at least since Hitler's times, right? And then that research fell to the Russians, and then in the 60s, the Americans started a program in remote viewing because they realized they needed it for counter-espionage and counter-intel. Right? And the communication with discorporate entities, even there seems to be something where we can get, messages from the beyond. But I leave that for some other time. Today I want to really focus on magic as sort of a radical, self-directed path of evolution, right? And the ability to create your reality. So, but we do know, though, in the province of the mind, what one believes to be true either is true or becomes true within certain limits. These limits are to be found experimentally and experientially, and when so found, these limits turn out to be further beliefs to be transcended, because in the province of the mind, there are no limits, as John C. Lilly reminds us. Also, a good book recommendation, Programming, Meta-Programming, the Human Biorobot, also a very influential book that you will find echoes of in my work here today. But I want to talk a bit of the occult. Right? When you look at this, what do you see? Right? Some scary demon, right? Maybe you even know it's Baphomet, right? But it's a scary picture, and most people that are inside of an existing cultural operating system, especially in the Christian, in this case, in the Christian context, will look at this and shy away from looking at it because it's a demon, something bad, right? But this is part of the occult, right? Because things had to be hidden, right? Because individuation was not something that the church or governments particularly, accelerated or supported, right? Instead of that, a lot of this knowledge that we'll talk about today was stuff people actually literally died for, right? In terms of protecting those books or protecting that knowledge, right? Because individuation, again, not something that was supported. So you had to hide things in plain sight. And if you look at this, for example, right, if you look at this beautiful painting by Eliphas Levi, who drew this, right, there's not just a demon there. Right? When you look at it, for example, it has breasts, right? So it's indicating hermaphroditeness. It's indicating dual gender, like all of the esoteric traditions talk about the integration of gender. You also have it in the 2 moons that are there, right? The black and white, nearly like a yin and yang, right? You also see the staff of Caduceus in there, right, with the 2 snakes, indicating that human operating system that we'll talk about in a moment. Right? And you have the magical formulas of solving coagula, the alchemical formulas there, right? And the head that's exploding in a flame, the hint at the pineal gland, right? And of course, the pentagram there as well, right? Indicating the 4 elements in spirit, right, and the ability to manipulate those. So there's a lot of stuff in here. A friend of mine even says it's a cross-section, actually a lateral cross-section of your brain that's represented here. So there's a lot of secrets packed into this. And there have been a lot of attempts to map the human operating system, right, and map reality and how it really works, right. Arthur Young's theory of process. You have the Kabbalah and Sufism in the Mediterranean areas, right. You have Indian lore, like the integral yoga from Sri Aurobindo, for example, who tried to bring it all together. You see it in Masonry, you see it in I Ching, you see it in Rudolf Steiner's work, you see it in Timothy Leary's work, you see it in alchemy, right. So it's always in Ken Wilber's work, of course, who was another synthesizer, right? So all these people have tried to synthesize and bring together knowledge of the human operating system and how we create reality, which is kind of what we want to do today a little bit. And Aldous Huxley called all that the perennial philosophy, right? These are the same truths that keep repeating themselves, keep coming up in better and better language. We have more and more new language for things, right? Today we have the language of quantum physics and neuroscience to describe some of the phenomena. Right? Back then, we would describe them as gods, and gods being angry and throwing thunder. You know what I mean? So there's different ways of how we've been able to, label and experience reality, and therefore break it down. Right? We have more available today than ever before. Plus, we also have the ability to actually compare from across the world. Right, 100 years ago, Manly P. Hall, one of the other people that whose work I studied, right, he was one of the very few people that had someone rich finance him, so he was able to fly around the world and collect all these different magical manuscripts and created this amazing library in Los Angeles. But that was an exceptional thing and only available to him and some very few people around him. Today, we have some of this knowledge available on the internet, and everybody with a $25 smartphone can look at texts that literally men and women died to protect in the past. But this perennial philosophy is here again, and we get to describe it again. Right? Well, because there are some very, very basic fundamentals that we seem to share. Right? The idea that pater informs mater, right? Patterns give form to matter. Right? If you think about a single cell, right, there's new information coming, and it can do those four things of not do anything, of freezing, right, of fleeing, of escaping, right, flight, or it can fight against it, right, or it can begin to form and integrate it. Right? And the same reactions happen on an individual level when we receive new information, right? We freeze and procrastinate on it, or we escape and delude ourselves into other things and distract ourselves into other things, or we fight against it or try and find somebody to blame for this, right? Or in the end go into this compromised world so that we can get out of that amygdala activation and actually get to an emergent phenomenon afterwards. And we even see it in societies, and you can kind of see the same kind of four stages that we've gone through in these last few years during COVID. Right? First ignored, then trying to escape it, then trying to fight it, and then trying to compromise around it, which is where most people are still at. So we seem to live in a sort of fractal universe where certain things like fire, water, air, earth keep repeating themselves again and again on all kinds of levels. Right? And fractals are beautiful to look at if you haven't dived into those, very, very fun. But in Magick, the first rule is as above, so below. Right? Meaning that these same principles apply again and again and again. Right? And for that, it's really important to understand analogous thinking. And analogous thinking means I can look at something and I can extract a schema, an idea, a Platonic idea, an archetype, right? I can extract that from that situation and apply it somewhere else. Right? And it's a bit of the capacity of the artist, of someone who can see something for what it's not. Right? But to see certain patterns in, different domains and seeing that they are the same patterns allows us to then find correspondences, right? And also work with correspondence, which is a big element of Magick. And, of course, we have to ask ourselves, what is reality in that case? Right? And important here is that reality comes from Latin res alles, which means other things. Right? So technically there's you, I, right? And everything that's not I, everything else. Res alles, other things, reality. And reality is not an objective thing. Reality is a subjective experience and a collective co-creation. When you look at constructivism, which became popular in the late 60s and 70s in philosophy and in psychology, it's the idea that reality is indeed a construct, a social construct. We decide this together. right? We decide to call this a glass and this water, right? And in that context, that's appropriate. Somewhere else, it's in glass and Wasser, and there in something else, right? It's like there's different terms for it, so it's not what it is, right? It's just what we've agreed on as reality, right? So whatever you're perceiving right now, that's your reality. You created this. You learned all those terms to see those things. Remember when we did at the beginning, when we located ourselves, we looked around the room and we saw things, right? We looked at things. That actually was naming things that you know. Right? That process of reality, of perception, is actually where we take about 1 million bits of information into our brain, but we evaluate about 3% of that, because that's the things we know, that we can therefore see. And so we see what we know. Right? So reality is not an objective thing that's out there, it's actually for you to be creating it. And in all that, the map is of course never the territory. All of what I'm going to share with you today is not the truth. The only truth I know is that I seem to be here right now. Right? All the things I'm going to share with you are maps that I've made based on other maps that other people have made throughout the last 1,000 years. Right? And they've all tried to map reality and understand how it works. And I've been building on those maps. But the map is not the actual thing. Right? It's just a map. Right? And so when we talk about magic, right? What is magic? Especially with that K at the end, the spelling that Crowley introduced. Right? And Crowley said that magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. Right? So it's science and art. Right? So there's both left brain and right brain who get to play here. Right? The part that wants to draw in new ideas and is unstructured and open, right? And also the part that wants to bring things into reality that's linear and precise and actually looks at what's happening and what's working. Right? And it's about causing change. But when you say causing change, I think you really meant causing transformation, because change happens all the time. Right? You've changed at least 3 times since breakfast. Right? We're all changing all the time. Change kind of happens. We're constantly growing new skin cells. Right? The average lifetime of your skin or cells in your body, for example, is 7 years, meaning that you have some cells like brain cells that last your whole life, while other cells, like your skin, keeps shedding, keeps shedding, keeps shedding. 90% of house dust is made of it. So next time you have one of those dust bunnies, you can look at it and see that's part of who you used to be. Right? So we're always changing. Right? Change is continuous, and it's a little bit of the same old plus. Right? Versus a transformation, which is something where akin to a death experience, where you cease to exist in point A, hopefully pop up in point D, and in between go, "Wah!" Right? And you have this crazy ride, and you don't even know who you are sometimes anymore. And typically what happens in our life when we have these distinct events like a new job or a breakup in a relationship or health issues or a death in the family, those are kind of transformational moments where who we were is not appropriate anymore, and we're going to have to find our feet again before we know who we're going to be. Right? And that's a transformation. My favorite example of transformation actually is if you take an iron rod, right, and you hold it like this and you hammer it, it'll turn into a magnet, right? Because all the little particles get shaken up and they align themselves with the strongest electromagnetic field around, which happens to be the Earth in that case. Right? And so if you hammer this steel rod, eventually all the particles become aligned and it'll become a magnet. And I think it's similar to that when we get shaken up, right? We get shaken up through whatever transformation, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But when we get shaken up, we realign ourselves to who we really are and who we came here to be, right? And then hopefully become a really strong, powerful magnet at some point. So what is magic and how do you do it? Crowley gives us this very, very simple formula, which he says is the key to Thelema, however you want to pronounce it. That is his core body of work of creating magic. And he says, do what you will is the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will. Right? So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it says do. Right? It's not just sitting around imagining something to happen. You're actually doing things. You're active here. You actually get to show up. Right? Many years ago, there was a movie called The Secret that came out, and a lot of people were super excited about the law of attraction. And there was this one guy in Long Beach, he sat on his sofa and he imagined $1 million check every day. Right? He did this visualization, very, very concrete. He could smell the ink on the paper, and he could see the signature on it, and he visualized this check. Right? And he thought, all I have to do is visualize this check, and it will come to me. I'm just going to attract this now. And he stopped going to work, which of course didn't help his employment, so he was fired after a while. And after a while, his wife got really annoyed with him because he was just sitting on the sofa all day visualizing this $1 million check coming his way. Right? And so she left at some point, including the kids, and he lost his apartment and ended up being homeless. Right? Never get that $1 million check. Right? Because you have to do something too. Right? It's not just about wishful thinking or magical thinking of, all I have to do is imagine it. No, it starts with do. Right? Do. And what do? What you will. Now, what you will is not what you want. Right? What you want is your emotional desires and pleasure and pain kind of behaviors. Right? That's an emotional want. Right? What we're talking about here is will. Right? So the very, very first job of a magician is actually to align with your will, to check in with what's my highest and best intention in this moment. Right? What's my will here, my true will here? Right? Whether I like it or not, what's the thing that really I'm here to create next? Right? And to really take the time to check in with that. Right? To connect to your genius, to connect to your holy guardian angel, to your soul, to whatever you want to call it. Right? To connect to your higher self, to say, what's really my highest and best intention for this moment? Right? Because that's your will. Right? And that's the whole of the law. Meaning, don't care as much about the laws of the outside. Right? Because in some ways, if you think about Robert Keegan, an American psychologist, talks about adult development. And he talks about how 65% of adults today, and that's in a weird world, are still on only the socialized level of adult development, meaning they're looking for other people to tell them who to be and what to do. Right? From mommy and daddy to teacher and preacher to the boss, right? Or to the politician, who's the authority figure that's going to tell me what to do so I do the right thing, right? What I should be doing. Right? And so most people are still on the socialized level, right? Versus the actual self-offering level. It's only about 35% who are on the self-offering level. That means you have your own values. Right? So for example, if you're coming around and you're coming a pedestrian crossing late at night and it's a red light, the socialized self would say, I have to stand here and wait until it's green. Right? The self-offering self can go and look at it and say, you know what, no cars far and wide, I think I can cross the street safely by myself. Right? And so rules are important. They're important for children. They're important to make things easier. Right? But in the end, you want to end up in a self-offering self where you're doing things not because someone told you or you fear punishment, but because you know they're the right things. Right? And so you're doing it from a self-offering perspective, and ultimately even from a self-transforming perspective where you can hold multiple identities in paradox. But that's a little bit further down the line. So the whole point here, though, is that doing your own will, right, following your own values and your own core and your own authentic self is the whole of the law. Right? So there's a call to self-authorization. And love is the law. In all likelihood, every moment has to do with connecting. Right? We're finding a way to connect. But not connect randomly, but under will. Right? Because there's a beautiful book by German psychologist Erich Fromm called The Art of Loving. And he talks about how the worst fear of the human is to be completely alone. Right? We're afraid to be alone because as soon as they say I, everything else is not I, right? Res alles, other things, and it's big and overwhelming and I'm scared, right? Because I don't know what's going on. So people shy away from that I a lot. Right? But what we do, and Erich Fromm says the 3 things we typically do to get over that is conformity. Right? We do what everybody else does. We follow the neighbor, we follow the trends, we do the right thing that everybody else does, right? Or we, get drunk and intoxicated, right? When in the bar, everybody's our friend, right? And then, in erotic entanglement, right? When we find ourselves in the throes of orgasm, we're one with everything again. Right? Problem with all 3 of those approaches is that they're all externally based, meaning they can all be taken away from you. Right? 100 years ago, there's a really good example of people who thought that they were German and they belonged, and were told that they don't, from one day to the next. Right? And so even if you comply and you conform really, really well, someone can still tell you from one day to the next that you don't belong anymore. Right? So conformity is not a surefire way to love, nor is drunkenness, right? Because when you wake up the next morning in the ditch, and puking, you're going to be right back to being alone. Right? And the same with erotic entanglement. Our partners can leave us, and people can leave us or die, and suddenly you're alone again. Right? And so Eric Fromm says that the only way to really actually sustain love is to actively love. Right? Love is the law, love under will, doing it consciously, right? Doing conscious reaching out, conscious connecting to the world around you. And how do you do it? Right? The method of science, the aim of religion. I'm going to start with religion, right? If that's the aim, what does that even mean? Right? A lot of people, when they hear religion, they think, gods and this and that. Right? What does religion even mean? Well, on the core, religion means, religio means to reconnect. Right? Like if you think about ligament, right? The ligament that connects your bones, ligare means to connect. And so religare means to reconnect. Similar to yoke in India, right? Yoke, English, connecting, binding. Right? You're connecting again. And such is a dualistic philosophy, right? Because you actually have to connect something. If there was just oneness, you wouldn't have anything to connect. Right? So religion is about reconnecting and doing whatever makes you feel reconnected. And there's all kinds of ways to do that. Right? You can sing along in a rock concert, right? You can dance and have sex. You can take drugs. All these different things I just mentioned, right? Coming back to Eric Fromm's talk about love, right, and extending yourself. There's all kinds of things you can do, and we'll talk about some of them today. But at the core is, the actual connection to yourself, right? Experiencing yourself, and especially, when things aren't working well, right? There's that function of catharsis in religion where it gives the individual meaning in their experience around themselves, right? And it gives me a sense of purpose and why I'm here and why things are happening to me. Right? Then, of course, there's the reaching up, right? The experiencing of the divine, right? Ecstasis. The function of religion, where I'm actually getting high in that sense, right? I'm getting high on God. I have God in me in some ways, right? And I'm connecting to these higher levels of my own capacity to create here, right? And having an ecstatic experience. And of course, from that comes because I just ate that mushroom, now you should too, right? Comes that whole shoulding of the people, right? And there's a you should, which is a function of control. I'm doing it this way, you should do it this way too. And of course, the collective, right? Where we have in the positive sense, we have the function of communitas, of belonging, of creating a community of people that you belong to and are part of, right? And the negative part, it's communities where we should, right? Where we force each other to behave in certain ways or sometimes follow super anachronistic, traditions just because we did this 1,000 years ago and the Lord said so, right? And they're following it in today's age where it might not even make sense anymore, right? But this is where the negative version of, we should comes in, right, where we have communities that are held together by crystallized beliefs. Right? And it turns out nearly all religions go through that pattern where initially they start really well and eventually the concepts crystallize and become the thing rather than the thing itself behind it. Right? And so then people focus on building a religion and building a cult or whatever, and things tend to go wrong at that point. Right? So it's important to also stay dynamic in your religion and keep focus on that left hand, right? Because on that right hand side, you have essentially the exoteric component, and here you have the esoteric, right? The exoteric, the outside, that's the map, right? The esoteric is the territory, your experience of yourself and your connection to that which is bigger than yourself. Right? That's the actual real esoterics. It's not woo-woo, it's not purple shirts, it's not pray to this crystal and you shall be healed. It's none of those things. It's actually you having a direct experience of yourself and your healing and of the divine above you. Right? And that's what esoteric are about, and they're about experiential things. Right? The methods of science, as Crowley says. Right? When science is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the universe. Right? The key is testable, repeatable, right? And your experience, not somebody telling you something, not something you have to suspend your disbelief for, right? But something you can simply try. And so in that sense, we told you we're going to do magic today here too. So what would you create? Right? If you had a magical wand and you could just go poof, what would happen in your reality? What's something that you would want to create? Because we're going to actually do some ritual around that together today. So think about something that you want to create in your life. Okay, got something? Awesome. If not, you're welcome to stop and come back to this, but think about something that you would want to create. Right? And Magick is actually really simple. There's 4 pieces to it: intention, imagination, ritual, and will. Right? And we'll go through all of those in detail. So intention, very simple. Right? What's the source of our intention? Right? Where does what you wanted to create just now, where does this come from? Right? You. Right? You operate, you human being. Right? Yourself. Right? This I. Right? And who is this I? Right? For many, many years when I was a kid, I got into yoga and then looked around the world and found that they all have very, very similar systems, no matter where you look at, that describe the human operating system. And I like that word of operating system, not just because I grew up in tech, but because it's a system, right? It comes from biology. Something goes in, something goes on, something comes out. It's what we describe as a system, right? And it's an operating system. It's the tools that allow us to create opus, to create a work, right? To operate here. It means to create something. Right? So our operating system is simply the systems we have available as humans to create in this reality. And there are some very common ones that we all can probably relate to. And Timothy Leary and Anton Wilson, who I really much enjoy, they actually talked about the human operating system already, and they talked about circuitry. Right? Or even John Liddy's book that I mentioned earlier about programming the biorobot. All these cyber metaphors were coming into being and coming to society in the 60s, right, with the beginning of the advent of computing. So hence, the idea of circuitry here. Some people call them chakras. I like the idea of circuit because, there's a couple of layers, which is for another time. But we do have those common ones, right, that we can all relate to. Right? We all have a body. You have a body which you can sense. Right? We did that at the beginning, right, when you looked around and you listened to what was going on and you smelled and you tasted and you felt, right, your body here. Right? So we have that body, the most gross interface into reality, if you want to look at it that way. Then we also have emotions. We kind of like certain things, we don't like things, right? We feel pulled towards certain things and not so much towards other things, right? Even this kind of base level intuition of do I like this person, not like this person? There's something going on. But we have emotions, very, very important, right? And shouldn't be neglected. And then of course we have a mind, right? I think, therefore I am. A whole bunch of white men a few hundred years ago thought that that's the apex of society, right? We just got to this place, we can think, we can be rational, or at least we're capable of reason, right? Animale rationabile, right? We're this animal capable of reason, and they thought that this was the shit, right? That we are thinkers now, I think, therefore I am, and emotions and body, that's for women and children, and lower developed creatures and other people that we can use as slaves, right? Obviously not a very good idea, right? Because this is not a hierarchy. This is a holarchy, meaning each part is whole in itself, right? And a body is as valuable as our emotions as our mind. Right? There are different kinds of ways of experiencing reality, processing reality, and creating output in reality, but they all have their merit. Right? And that's not it yet either, right? Because what most people are beginning to wake up to right now is this relational intelligence. Right, coming back to the self-offering versus self-socialized self, right? The socialized level is on that thinking level, right? The self-authorized level is actually where you are conscious about your relationships and the choices you make, right? You're taking responsibility for your relations in life. You're consciously relating, consciously extending yourself. And then, of course, there's your voice, right? In the sense that part that you express with. And it's not just the voice that I'm using to talk to you right now, but your individuality, right? Who you are uniquely. Right? Nobody's actually ever been you, if you think about that for a moment. Right? So next time you judge yourself for not being good enough or not doing more, come back to compare to what? Right? You're the very, very first version of you. Nobody's ever been you before. Right? So you're doing this first. Right? So that's why it's so important that you express your individuality, that you express your voice, that you sing, dance, shout, whatever, paint, draw, write, do something to express yourself and your unique way of looking at the world, because nobody sees the world the way you do. Everybody has a different reality, and yours is unique and precious. Right? So owning your voice and owning our vision, right? We all have the capacity to imagine things. Right? And imagining things actually originally came from worry. Right? Because there was a saber-toothed tiger there yesterday, and I can imagine him being there again, so don't go there. Right? That's why we learn to imagine, anticipate danger. Right? But we can also imagine good things. Right? And if you think about how many times do you envision success or how many times do you envision failure? Right? Very important, we'll get back to that in a moment. And ultimately this idea of calling, right? That we have the capacity to create purpose falls in there, right? The idea that we are meant to be doing something here, right? Because each of these different interfaces also comes with different needs, right? And there's some dynamics in there, right? There's this existential dynamic of turning lead into gold, of turning our material experience into beauty, into wisdom, into the philosopher's stone, right? And there's also the other dynamic of something wanting to come through us and emerge through us, right? Which, essentially on the way will then meet all of our bullshit and might or might not make it all the way down, right? Which is really the art of creation that we're talking about here, aligning that. But each is connected with different needs as well, as I said a moment ago. Right, on a physical level, we have physiological needs. We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to drink water, we even need touch. Right? We need some basic things to take care of our body here. Right? Then, of course, we have safety needs. We have the need to feel okay. We want to feel like we're all right, and we're going to be all right tomorrow. Right? We have that sense of safety that's really important to us. Right? This is where the wish for certainty comes from. Right, which is kind of ridiculous because you'll never have certainty, but that's where it comes from. We want to feel safe there. Right? And of course we have self-esteem needs. Right? We all want to feel good about ourselves. We want to feel like we bring something here. We want our contribution to be appreciated and valued, right? Which is one of the reasons why acknowledgement is such a huge, huge tool if you want to make people feel like they're connected to you, right? Acknowledging them for how they're showing up, right? Because each of us is doing a lot to show up every day. Right? Being a human is not an easy game, right? And so being appreciated for your contribution, for what you bring into the world is so important for your self-esteem. Right? And then of course we have social needs, right? Because we want to be esteemed by others. We want to feel like we belong and we're connected to the people around us, that we have a sense of community, of belonging, right? Also this important need for our relationships and for our relational intelligence, to feel connected. And on our voice level, we have that need for self-actualization. Right? As I said, nobody's ever been you before. Right? So this is you making you happen. Right? Your unique expression. And it's very sweet when that first wakes up and people realize that they could be whoever they want to be. Right? They can play things. They can try out things. They can experiment with different identities. Right? And at first, it's very tapsy, just like when a child learns how to walk, and it's also very narcissistic at first, right? Because it's all about me, right? And I just woke up to purpose, and I just woke up to this thing, and you should do this too. That's how religions start, right? But the nice thing here is that eventually you'll be humiliated enough to gain some humility, and you actually realize that you need to transcend yourself. Right? That your self-actualization, your self-expression is only meaningful if you put it in service to something bigger than yourself. Right? Because otherwise it's a little bit of self-stimulation here. Right? But putting your self-expression into service to something bigger than yourself. Right? Transcending yourself. And anybody who's been in a recovery program knows too that you will need something bigger than yourself to orient yourself on, because otherwise you have no reason to grow. And grow beyond yourself again and again and again. Right? And so there's a self-transcendence that Maslow, and for those of you who have heard of Maslow, from you can probably identify those needs here that he's been talking about. He actually added that at the end, towards the end of his life, because he realized that self-actualization wasn't the apex. There was something more. And even self-transcendence can lead to martyrdom, right? So there's this other level of meaning up there. Right, and meaning, right, if you look at Viktor Frankl's book, In Search of Meaning, is something we all want from life. We want to have a meaningful life. And if you think about the word meaning, it comes from German meinen, which means to make mine. Right, so you're making life your own. You're really doing you. You're not living someone else's stories, someone else's expectations of who you should be, but you're really doing you. You're being an individual. Right, and you're following your own unique calling, your own vision, your own expression, and bringing that into the world through your relationships and the things you can do here. So the thing is, we are actually all creating magic at all times, right? Because we have these interfaces running. This is the basic human hardware, human software, right? Each of us has these things running all the time. Now, most people don't think about it much, and they might envision, I would like to succeed over here. But then they keep thinking, I'm not worthy, and I don't deserve this, and I'm not good enough, right? Or they might envision a six-pack up here, but then drink all those six-packs and not work out, right? And so when you take these colors and you mush them together, what do? You get brown, right? You get shit magic, right? You get crap magic. That's what most people create for themselves all day long, right? And we kind of all do in some ways, right? We all create shit situations for ourselves because part of us thinks that we actually deserve that. Right? And so the first learning of magic is actually most of the time towards differentiating and stratifying light, either into white magic or black magic. Right? And black magic is really the idea that for you to get yours, someone else has to suffer. Right? And white magic is exactly the opposite. It's the idea that for everybody else to get theirs, you have to suffer. Right? It's the magic of martyrs. Right? And let's not confuse, and so what you want to do actually is kind of use all of it. Right? My friend calls it technicolor magic. I like to call it creation magic. The idea of turning all of those interfaces on, experiencing yourself fully there, and utilizing them to create what you will. Right? But the reality is you're going to do all of these anyway. You're going to still create some shit for yourself. On some days you're going to be a little black magician, on some days you're going to be a white magician. Right? And let's also not confuse the symbology with the intention. Right? When I talk about black and white magic, this is purely about the intention. Right? It has nothing to do with the symbology you use. Some of the sweetest, kindest people I've met in my life were Satanists. Right? And I actually have a way more respect for someone who is willing to invoke a vile, angry, jealous demon to cope with their own shadow than for someone who walks around and says, hey man, we're all one, right? Right? My yoga teacher used to say when people talk about oneness, hold on to your wallet and your girlfriend. Right? So, don't confuse intention with the tools you use, because in the end, it's always intention, imagination, ritual, and will. I'm not talking about that, right? When you talk about black and white and evil, good and evil, right? One of the symbols that comes up for a lot of people is this, right? Yin Yang, as a symbol of dualism, right? But it's actually not a symbol of dualism, which is kind of funny that people look at it that way, right? Because they see male, female, black and white, right? But even here, there's actually 7, 8 dimensions, right? The first one is, of course, the I exist, right? And then the other exists, right? Black and white, good and bad, man and woman, whatever, right? I and the other, right? But then look at the little white dot inside of the black and the little black dot inside of the white, right? I exist in other and other exists in me, right? I have feminine and masculine aspects inside of myself, just like everybody else. Good aspects and bad aspects in myself, just like everybody else, right? Sometimes when you do good things, there's an element of bad in there, right? That also comes with or has bad consequences. And sometimes when you do bad things, there's also some good things in there, right? We learn from our mistakes, right? And so really the key here is that it's a constant dynamic, right? I mean, if you think about it, even the line between them is not a straight line, it's a squiggly line. And it means it's dynamic, it's moving, right? In this dynamic mirroring with each other, we continue to evolve, right? And this is how the Tao keeps going, right? Similar in Hegel's philosophy of dialectics, right? But it's a back yin and yang that actually makes it move, right? It's the engine that ultimately moves towards wholeness, right? Because the whole thing is a circle. The universal symbol for wholeness. Ultimately, it always is whole and evolving towards the whole. Right? And the next dimension is that you can actually see that. Right? You can step outside to actually see that that's happening and not identify with it. Right? And that's really key to getting out of suffering. Even Buddha said, life is suffering. Suffering stems from ignorance. Ignorance can be overcome, right, by stepping away from the identification. And I always say, suffering comes from interface identification. If I identify with my body, if I identify with my emotions, if I identify with my thoughts, if I identify with my relationships, if I identify with my voice and vision and creation, then I'm in trouble. Right? If I understand that I am that which experiences itself through these things and is able to create reality through these interfaces, I stay the observer and creator, who I really am. So nothing is true. Everything is permitted. Right? One of the tenets of chaos magic, really important to remember, there's no truth out there. Right? There's people with truths, and there's people with good data, right? And follow the data, follow the experiments, follow the stuff that's actually testable, right? Because that's science. Right? So nothing is true, everything is permitted. It's a chaos magic tenet. For those of you who play computer games, it's also the Assassin's Creed motto. Little side note. So coming back to what's your intention. Right? When you talked about earlier, we talked about creating magic, and you were going to create some magic. So, what magic are you creating? Right? What are you trying to make happen, and where's that coming from? Right? Is there an unfulfilled need underneath that? Right? And if there's an unfulfilled need, before you turn to magic, is there something that you can do to take care of that need? right? Because nobody likes needy people. And the universe doesn't like needy magicians. Right? If you're coming all needy, then what you're doing is you're actually pushing it away. Right? And you're actually creating the opposite for yourself. Right? So be very, very conscious of where you're coming from with your intention. Right? And again, what tools can you use? What can you do already to take care of your needs first? To practice self-care, to actually be authentic. Right? That first step of authenticity is to take care of your own needs, identifying your needs and taking care of them, and not expecting anybody outside of you to take care of them unless you have an agreement to do so. Right? So when you practice Magick, make sure you check your intentions, because even sometimes we create a little bit of stuff consciously, and we create a lot of stuff unconsciously. And if there's unconscious, deeper needs not met, they will manifest in things that might not be so pleasant. But let's stay with the pleasant side for a moment and imagine what we want to create. Right? So now take a moment and think about, what does it feel like when you've accomplished it? Right? Because you have this maybe clear, maybe not so clear idea of what you want to create right now. Right? So imagine that, and imagine how are you going to feel when it's done? Right? When you've accomplished it, when it exists in reality, what are you feeling like? Right? Because that's actually your emotional anchor into the future that's going to get you there. Right? So instead of imagining exactly what it's going to look like, because it might look like a little different, you know what I mean? Because otherwise you're also pushing it away, because maybe you want something like this and you manifest that, or you focus on that, and the universe wants to actually give you this, which is even better. But you're so focused on that you're actually pushing both away. Right? So make sure that you're imagining not just what it looks like when you're done, but how you're feeling. Right? Because that's the thing, and we're going to use that in the ritual in a moment. That feeling, that sense of excitement, of joy, of confidence, of happiness, whatever it might be for you, right? That you're feeling when you've actually accomplished it. That's the anchor you want to focus on. Right? And really to think about who you're going to imagine yourself to be at that moment. Right? Because when we want something that's not in our reach yet, that also means we get to become someone else. Right? We become a different kind of persona, a different identity. Right? So who are you imagining yourself to be? Right? Imagine that thing that you want to create, how it's going to feel when you have it, and what kind of person is that? Right? What kind of aspirational self of yours already has that? Right? Who are you going to be? Right? That's what you want to focus on. And one exercise you can do here that's actually quite helpful is automatic writing. Right? And the way you do this exercise is you choose 3 time intervals, like for example 3 years, 1 year, 6 months from now, right? And then you give yourself a timed interval for each, for example 5 to 10 minutes. Right? And you set a timer for those 10 minutes and go to the first interval and you start writing. And the key is to keep writing, right? You want to go into a little bit meditative space beforehand, that's also very helpful. But then the key is to write, and write whatever comes to mind. Don't censor yourself in any way, shape, or form. The key is to keep the pen on the paper, right? And continuously write for 10 minutes. Right? If you don't need more time, then take 20 minutes, right? But the key is to keep writing until stuff comes up that you didn't expect even, right? And so then you do that for the first interval, you do it for the second time interval, and then for the third interval, right? And getting closer to now, and that can also help you actually plan for the next year or half year or whatever time intervals you're working with. Right? But really good exercise if you want to do it right now, to go deeper into what you want to create here. Yeah, it's a really good exercise. If you want to do that right now, you can do that, or of course do it, after you've watched this video. But highly recommend it, and it's always interesting and surprising what comes up in our own future visions for ourselves. But now, of course, we want to actually do a ritual, right? Because what we started with was our intention, and we began to imagine who we're going to be and what it's going to feel like when we have it, right? Really feeling that part. And now we want to program that into our subconscious, right? Which is really what the ritual is about. Because 80% of what we do all day long is unconscious. We don't even think about it. Right? We're just going to brush our teeth and do these things, all habitual, and it's good, because if we had to learn how to brush our teeth every day, it would be very, very annoying. Right? And so it's okay that we have those habits. The key is to program them to adjust towards your goal and towards your vision of what you want to achieve. Right? And actually program your unconscious or subconscious. And that's what rituals are all about. Right? And rituals are really a transformational ritual. Right? A transformation meaning that who you were at the beginning is not who you're going to be at the end. Right? And it's not going to be about just evolving a little bit, but about actually jumping to this new point, in point D. Right? And so to start with, what you want to do is defreeze. Right? And defreezing is really the idea of creating neuroplasticity in the brain. Right? When you think about it as a child, your brain is like Play-Doh. It's like super wide open, and every experience makes a big pathway here. Until you kind of have your major pathways, and people tend to operate on the same pathways all the time. Every time they come here, they go, same groove, because that groove is already big and deep, so we're going to keep going on that groove. So if I want to change something magical, massively, radically, I actually need to create openness in the brain first. I need to defreeze, create that neuroplasticity. Then I can inform with some new forms, some new ideas, some new information, right? I can program some new patterns into my matter, right? And then I can refreeze that so that I can build these new circuits afterwards. Right, so it's defreeze, inform, and refreeze. And before you go to Magick, of course, the first step is to set the stage. Right? And Timothy Leary actually talks about set and setting when he talks about the psychological experience, but essentially it's the same for Magick, right? Because you go into a psychedelic space, right? However you're going to get there, and we'll get back to that in a moment. But the first thing, of course, is your own set. It's like, what's your psychological situation? Right? What's your general situation? Right? When we began this, we did check in with our body and our emotion and our mind and our relationships and the earth and our connection to that and our connection to the higher things. Right? Again, making sure that you're psychologically prepared to engage into this work, because some of it can go a little crazy, and you want to have that solid foundation. And of course, the setting, right? What's around you. Right? If you're in a big public festival, maybe not the best idea to do some crazy magic, because you're also making yourself vulnerable in that state of defreezing, right? And any new experience can leave some deep marks. So you want to make sure that both your psychological state as well as the environment is set up for magic, right? And that goes into the location that you're doing these things, right? Decoration of the place around you, but also of yourself through maybe robes or special ceremonial robes that you might want to wear, special ceremonial garb, right? And then there's ornaments, special things or sacred objects that mean things to you, that give you power and support your magic, right? You also want to have, pleasant sounds around you or music that gets you into that mindset, and scents, in terms of incense, of course, and food, right? Even the oral, gratification in Tantra, you start by feeding your lover, right? By giving gifts to the god, by giving food to the gods, and by having these delights, and by activating your sensory experience through delightful foods. And then you want to go into defreezing. Right? And defreezing is, again, that state of creating neuroplasticity. And there's all kinds of ways we found throughout history to do that. One is pain and strain. It's a little bit like the idea of blood magic, right? When you're cutting yourself, or when you're, carrying a heavy weight on certain parts of your body, as the fakirs do, or sit on a nail bed, right? And dealing with those things. Pain and strain is something that actually puts you into a different state of mind. Or when you work out really, really hard, or you might have heard about the runner's high, right? When you get certain endorphins in your brain after that moment of straining yourself and pushing through, right? Because that pushing through is also you being your own dopamine programmer. Right? So pain and strain, a very simple way to release opiates in the brain and endorphins. One way to create a defreezing state. Another one is breathing. Of course, breathing is one of the most common tools around the world. It's been used for thousands of years. And through changing how we breathe, we change the gas composition in our lungs, and with that our consciousness. Right? For example, if I breathe like this, like fire breath, right, that gets you high after a while. Right? It's part of the whole Kundalini thing, right? Is that you do these strenuous things, but breathing through it, right, and breathing in a very specific patterns actually activate your brain in a new way. Right? Stanislav Grof, a researcher in the US, after LSD was prohibited in the 60s, 70s, he actually said, shit, I was just doing all this amazing research with LSD, how can I create a similar brain state? And he looked at some of the ancient breathing techniques, and he ended up creating this thing called holotropic breathing, which essentially gets you as high as LSD does, simply through breathing, right? Because it's been around for a while, longer even. Right? So there's tools that you can use from breathing, and even from the very, very basic, if you want to calm yourself down, short, deep inhale, long exhale. Like we did at the beginning, allows you to be rest, be calm, and pay attention. Right? So for breathing, also a tool to create a neuroplastic state. Then there's light and sound. We've done in the past even with flickering, light flickering, right? Even the magic of fire and watching a fire go, right? But also with light and sound machines. Or now there's even an app, apps for light and sound machines you can put on, and you can actually have that, particular frequencies of light or particular frequencies of sound that then activate your neurology. Right? For example, through hemisync, through binaural beats, you can actually induce specific brain state frequencies, alpha states and theta states, simply from listening to sound. Right? And so again, those open state, alpha state, theta state in your brain, the one that is not your beta default stressed reality, but the relaxed versions of yourself, they're very conducive to deep learning and programming things into your subconscious. Then of course there's fear. Right? Remember, like when in the days when it was secret societies that were teaching magic, right? You imagine you're like the new adept, right? The new guy, and you're coming in all naked and into this room, and there's a whole room of people and big hoods going, right? It's freaky, right? You're freaking the fuck out in that moment, right? You're really scared, right? You're kind of confused and overwhelmed. But in that case, you have adrenaline in your brain and you're actually really open to a new experience. Right? And so when you then learn a symbol or a new magical thing, it's really going to imprint itself into your neurology, right, in that moment. Another way, of course, is nonsense. Right? So it doesn't have to be fear. Nonsense also can get us out of the default thinking mode. Right? And in some ways, a lot of the magic rituals are there to get you out of your normal mindset. Right? And so, for example, even some example of the Japanese tea ceremony, right? It's a very, very precise discipline. That's the next step actually, is discipline. Very disciplined way to do this thing. And by doing it exactly that way, you kind of don't think about it. And you don't think about yourself. Right? And it's the same with nonsense, right? Sometimes magical formulas are really long, nonsensical things that you have to memorize, right? And so by doing that and by speaking these nonsensical things, you're tricking your brain out of your normal way of thinking. Right? Christopher Hyatt, who I mentioned earlier, has a book called Undoing Yourself of Energized Meditation. And in that, some of the meditations he does is right, bringing you right back to these initial sounds that babies make, right? Ma, first sound we learn around the world, right? Ba, next one, right? Bringing you back there actually creates that neuroplasticity as well. Right? And then there's that discipline, memorizing some of those crazy things and actually doing it and following it step by step, right? Also a way to get into that defreezing mindset. And connected to that is this idea of surrender and devotion. Right? When you think about Bhakti Yoga and the Hare Krishnas that pray to Krishna, 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 or the monk that prays to Christ, 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 by doing that, by surrendering and by devoting yourself, or even back in the day, the people would stand underneath the towers and sing to the beautiful lady up there with a lute. Right? They weren't trying to get laid necessarily. They were actually invoking her beautiful virtues and praising them so that they would have more in themselves. Right? So devotion, also a tool to use. And then, of course, arousal and orgasm. Some of the strongest energy we can create as humans is sexual energy. Right? When you think about wanting something, right? But then you think about wanting it, right? Whole different story. Right? And around orgasm, just before and after, you actually are in a neuroplastic state. So you're really open again, which also is a cause of much sexual dysfunction. Right? Somebody laughing or making a stupid joke or saying something mean in that moment can really screw you up. Right? So be really conscious of that state around orgasm. And even Crowley said, every time we make love, every time we have an orgasm, we make a child. Right? You're setting an intention out there in the world. And the big difference between Eastern and Western style sex magic is that in Eastern magic, it's all about withholding and internalizing, right? Holding it in, right? And actually even not ejaculating, but like keeping it in and building that energy inside of you. And in the Western magic, it's more about actually expelling it, right? And actually using all those body fluids to then, make talismans with it, etc., which we'll get to in a moment. Right? But arousal and orgasm, sex magic, one of the keys practiced around the world, even in esoteric traditions I knew that were celibate officially. On the later stages, they actually introduced sex magic again. Right? And one of the most powerful tools that we have is working with our body, and especially also working with all the bullshit shame we have around our body. Right? We live in a society where we're constantly shown images of how we should look and what we should look like. And there's a lot of shame involved in both even our body as such, let alone in our sexual deviance. Right? Because everybody has crazy thoughts and sexual thoughts that maybe seem weird and aberrant. When you actually talk to people, you find that a lot of people have the same visions. You know what I mean? And so talk to your partner about whatever your dreams are. Please don't hold back, right? Because you want to learn and grow, right? And nothing is perverted unless there's no consent. Right? That's the only reason. The only time something is not okay is if there's some party involved is not consensually there. Other than that, go for it. Get your freak on. Have fun, right? But use it for magic. Right? Don't use it just for pleasure. Use it also to then use that open state to program something into you. Right? And kind of the same thing goes for entheogens. Right? We would use them quite frequently in our society, depending on who you ask. Right? And there's all kinds, right? From the very basic things like opiates and the opiate crisis we have in the US right now. Right? If you take opiates, you're right back into your primordial soup. You're denying your body even, right? You're like, you're not even really here. Right? You're just somewhere else. Right? Then you have, of course, alcohol, the legal drug, and sugar is actually on that circuitry as well. They make you feel good, make you feel bad. Right? When you drink alcohol, suddenly everybody's your friend. Or what do you say about my mother? Right? You might have experienced those very quick shifts in emotions that happen with alcohol. Right? And it's a very dangerous drug in that sense because all of our unprocessed emotional shit can come out at any point in time. And you see that when you look at bar fights. Right? Then, of course, on the mental level, there's nicotine, caffeine, cocaine, amphetamine. They're all very, very poisonous, and they're all very detrimental to your health. And in spite of the fact that we've made caffeine legal drug all over the place, right? But all of those are really actually very damaging to your system because it's also a contraction. But they're really good for thinking, right? Clarity of thought comes like a racehorse, right? And Mr. Freud was a huge fan of cocaine for that reason, right? And a lot of German engineering in the beginning of the century was probably also due to amphetamine, the same in America. Right? So there's a lot of that pushing and staying up and being very, very present and smart. Right? Then you have the level of relational entheogens, right? And here MDMA is probably most appropriate. It's there to actually help you relate again in new ways, right? And connect again in new ways. On the voice level, you have THC, right? The drug that actually, when you look from above for the first time, you're like, dude, I'm high. Look at my hands. What are my hands? What's going on? This is me. Wow, right? So it's the first transpersonal circuitry that gets activated there. And then you have psilocybin, LSD, mescaline, etc., ficcal here a lot, which essentially open your third eye. Right? And they kind of like take away your default perception filters of how you've been taught that reality looks, right? And suddenly this is not a glass anymore, but back to a swirling thing of energy, right? Because the definitions fall away, so you can see more again. And these, in particular, are the ones that are really, really good for neuroplasticity. Right? So in terms of neuroplasticity, psilocybin, LSD, mescaline have all been proven to create that openness in the brain that allows you to really enter new things. And talking about entering new things, up here with the crown with DMT, ketamine, salvia, datura, and some of the other ones that are really just like opening the crown and downloading shit. It might not always be pleasant. Sometimes it's not pleasant at all. And they're really there to give you new inspiration and insight for your life. But in general, children don't do this at home. You know what I mean? Make sure that you have proper setting, proper support if you go into any of these directions of pushing magic with entheogens, because there are goodies out there. There's things you can pull yourself in, even if they're just negative thought forms that leave you suddenly being depressed, or suddenly being angry all the time, or suddenly being sad all the time, or lacking energy. There's all kinds of things you can catch yourself here. So especially going out to a party and throwing all of those in, maybe not the best idea. Right? Because you're open for everything around you that can program your reality for you. So if you do any of these things, do it with a trained professional, do it in proper care, do it in a proper setting, do it for healing, do it for growth, do it for magic, and you'll probably be okay. So now that we're in defreezing mode, right now we're open, now we want to inform this, right, and put some form into this, right, and it can happen for visuals, right, for example, yantras or god images that you might have around the room. It can happen for mantras and affirmations, right, by repeating certain things continuously in that state, you're anchoring that new reality, right. It can happen for declarations because you're telling someone, or incantations or oaths, right, but you're telling a demon what's up, right? I'm talking about telling demons. In general, you have these two dynamics, right? You have invocation, right, which is really wanting to have more of. It's similar to the Bhakti Yoga that I mentioned earlier, right, where you're bringing something in. Like, for example, if you want to be more confident, you might want to, invoke the god of confidence, right, or a demon of confidence, right, and bring that into your life, right, versus an evocation, which is really about trying to get rid of shit, right? Like, for example, if you have issues with jealousy or anger, you might want to put a demon out there that's a demon of jealousy and yell at him and tell him what's up. Tell him you've had enough of this shit. You don't want to spend your time with these stupid thoughts all the time. Right? And you tell that demon what's up. Right? And so the idea of invocation and evocation is really about what do you want more of, right? That you invoke into yourself, right? And what do you want to have less of? You want to bring that out of yourself, evoke that, and put that outside of your circle so you can yell at it, right? And tell it where to go. Right, and in general, like you see the sigils here in the background, if you're familiar with what that is, the sigils of the Goethe, right? And even Mathers, who was one of the big people in Golden Dawn at the time, he actually talked about how the 72 demons of the Goethe are actually regions of your mind or regions of your brain. Right? And so you actually, what you're doing when you're invoking or evoking a demon is you're actually kind of controlling which part of your mind you're activating and working with. Right? And this is really where this analogous thinking comes in again, right? That you can see something, but it's not. You're taking your own shadow aspects, your own aspects of yourself, for example, bringing them outside of yourself in the form of a demon, in the form of a creature that you're pulling in, right? That you're projecting this onto, right? And therefore then control that, and by controlling it out there, ultimately controlling it in here. Right, so that's the secret behind invocation and evocations. But in the end, it's all about programming your operating system, right, and bringing them into alignment, right, so that your intention that we started with, right, your imagination, right, your creative expression of that through your ritual, right, and the choices you'll make, we'll get into will in a moment, right, and the thoughts you have, the emotions you have, the embodiment you have, all are in alignment towards that vision that you want to create. Right? That's the whole goal here, is to align them. Right? Because if you imagine them, for example, as different instruments, right? This instrument's playing one melody, this instrument's playing another melody, this is yet another. That's craziness. Right? You want them to bring them, align them, and have them all play the same rhythm. And then, of course, you want to embody it. Right? And the embodiment, one thing that you can do is create a talisman in a ritual. So, right? When you're doing your ritual, whatever it might be, in the end, have a little gimmick around, something that you can hold in your pocket or bring with you, or have around the house that you can see, regularly, right? That continuously triggers the subconscious, right? Because you want to have now with this imagination you had, right? And now you're creating a ritual around it. Now you want to manifest that ritual into something physical, concrete that you can look at, that continuously reminds you and continuously programs your subconscious. It can be a physical object, as I said, or it can also be a so-called sigil. I mentioned sigils a moment ago. A sigil is a very simple, powerful technique that you can use to turn intention into a symbol. And the way it works is very simple. You take your sentence, for example, I feel happy and content, if that's your intention. You take that sentence and you take all the repeating letters out, and you take the vowels out, and you end up with something like this, right? And then you kind of begin to arrange those letters and ultimately end up with something that looks maybe like that. Right? So now you have this little symbol, right? And the sigil, if you charge it with intention during your ritual, right? You're imagining how you're going to feel and that excitement and exuberance of having achieved your magic that you're projecting onto the sigil. Right? Now you take that sigil and you can put it on your bathroom mirror, put it in your fridge, put it in your car, put it wherever you regularly are, on your computer monitor as a little post-it or something, and you're going to continuously see it and continuously remind yourself of that, even if you forgot about what it means in the first place. Right? You might have chaos magicians in particular use lots of sigils, right? And you might have 50 of them around the room. You don't even know which one was which anymore. But your subconscious knows. Right? You might not consciously know, but if you programmed it during a ritual, it's still going to do that work. Right? A modern day version of sigils you can use as passwords. Right? Like, for example, if you take that same sentence here and replace some numbers with vowels of numbers and add some crazy couple of extra characters like the $sign or this asterisk here, suddenly you have a pretty decent password. Right? And you need to type a password multiple times a day probably. Right? So might as well use that instead of typing something stupid or password 1234, right? Typing something that at least subconsciously keeps reminding you of your intention. Right? So you're essentially, again, programming your subconscious every time you type in your password. Another really simple tool you can use. The whole idea in the end is that you're going to become the god for your dog. Right? And you might have heard about Pavlov's dog. Right? Pavlov was a psychologist, beginning of like behavioral psychology, and he had his dogs. And every time he would feed them, he would ring a little bell. Right? So it would say ding, 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 and he would feed him. Ding, 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 feed him. Ding, 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 feed him. And surprise, surprise, after a while, he would just ring the bell, ding, 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 and give him no food, but the dog would start salivating as if there was food. Right? Because he now connected that ding, ding, ding with the food idea, and dogs were just salivating because they're like, ding, 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 where's my food? Ding, 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 where's my food? Right? And it's the same thing that you want to do with yourself. Right? As I mentioned earlier, 80% of what we do every day is kind of habitual. Right? So if you can actually create those habits in a way where you're constantly triggering yourself to do the right things, right? Awesome. Right? So become your own little doggy to your own god. Right? Become your own god to your own doggy. Why not? Right? And so what we're going to do now is actually try that a little bit. And there's a technique from neurolinguistic programming called anchoring. It's very, very simple. The idea is that you combine a sense with an emotion and a word. So if you go back to what your intention was earlier, right? What we want to do is essentially going back to intention, imagination, rituals. We're going to do now, and combining a word with an emotion with an embodiment. Right? So what you can do is things simple. You go back in a moment to imagine that moment of when your magic has already arrived and you're already feeling it. Right? You feel really, really good. We're going to anchor that emotion with a word. And I'm going to use the word cheesecake in our effort here just because it's fun and I like to use it. You can use whatever word you want, right? So whatever makes sense to you. If it's something funny, I find it helpful because then there's this aspect of humor that kind of works with you as well. But choose a word, right, with that. And then we're going to find a place on your body. And it can be literally any place on your body, right? You have a very big surface here, area to work with here. What's easy, of course, is if you use your fingers like this, right? You can use kind of mudras in that sense, but you can also use the different digits here, 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 right? So you can set all kinds of anchors, right? Or here, or you can even do it here and here. Right? Whatever is comfortable you, find something that you want to use. I like the hands because then it's kind of, you can do it under the table. If you're sitting in a meeting somewhere and you need some power, like one of the first times I actually did this, it was a young consultant and my consulting boss dropped me off at a new project in a new city. I had no idea what I was doing. I was jet lagged. And he's like, this is your project now. I'm like, shit, and his name was Howard, and so I anchored Howard. Right? And I figured, okay, what would Howard do? Right? And I kind of imagined being Howard, and I anchored Howard. And so now every time I was in a meeting, I was freaking out because I didn't know what to do. I'm like, Howard. Right? And I would have a bit more Howard in me suddenly. Right? And suddenly I would know what to say and what to do. Right? So this is something that you can do, anchor whatever you want. But for today, we're going to use that intention that you had earlier. Right? So come back to that for a moment. Right? Come back into that emotion, right? Of like, imagine you've already achieved it. Right? Like your magic's already happened. It's already true. It's already there. And please ignore the silence in the background. But it's already there, and you're totally imagining it. Like, feel it as intensely as you can, to the point where your butthole puckers a little bit. Right? You're so excited when it's happening. Right? When you can really, 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 really feel it. Right? Push those things together and say cheesecake, or whatever word you want to use. Right? Okay, so we're going to do it again. Right? Think about it, really feel the emotion, how exciting it's going to feel, how great it's going to be, how much fun you're going to have doing this, right? It's going to be super awesome. Cheesecake. Right? All right, one more time. All right, go back into this, imagining it, feeling it, really like your whole body, every cell of your body is kind of dancing in this new rhythm, right? Everything is happening, you're totally doing it, you're totally that new person that totally rocked this, right? Cheesecake. All right, so now you can do this a couple of times, you can play with that again and again to strengthen it. But see what it does, in a couple of hours, just kind of go back to your cheesecake or whatever word you were using, or whatever trigger you had, see if you can pull that back up, if it connects you to that moment again. And if not, go back there, strengthen it, do it a couple of times until really the connection is made, because then you can pull it up anytime you want to, right? Then it's yours for the taking. So, and after that, of course, right, we've had an intention, we've had our imagination, we've done our ritual now. And the next thing that's important is let go. Right? Because again, nobody likes needy people, and you're like, hey, has my magic happened yet? 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 Not gonna happen, right? You're actually pushing it away, right, with your impatience. Right? So the important thing here after the ritual is let go and let God, trust. Right? There's actually even a study that showed that prayers that end in thy will be done had a higher chance of success. Right? So think about that. Like if you actually let go and say, let go and let God, but this or something better, so what you say, right? Mote this be, or something better, you let go of it, and then see what happens. Right? Because it might take you here and here and here on the way there, and open up totally cool, exciting new pathways. Right? And this is where will comes in. Because of course, you're getting a whole bunch of holy shit. Right? Because the universe says, great, you want to have this? You want to be that person? Super cool. I'm going to bring you everything you need to know and learn in order to become that person. Which might not be that pleasant. Right? So it might be all the shit that we still have in the way. Right? So it might bring you exactly those things so that you can overcome them and become the person you want to be. Right? But it's not always pleasant, and this is why it's so important to consciously create yourself. Right? If you think about that alchemical vessel that is you, right? Alchemy is not a pleasant endeavor. Right? On the very first stage, you're burning things. What does it mean? You're learning to frustrate your desires and your urges. Right? For example, withholding orgasm, or dieting, or fasting, or doing things like that, right? Ascetic things, right? So you're burning your own desires, right? You're dissolving emotionally, letting go and trusting, and dissolving ideas of who you thought you were, right? Also not necessarily always pleasant, right? You're separating things in your mind and figuring out what's what, right? And if there's sort of reason, cutting shit apart, also sometimes brutal, right? Then of course on the relational level, right? When you're bringing back things together, sometimes that might mean that certain relationships are not supporting you in your life anymore. And you need different relationships. You need a new community to support you differently. I mean, with that, I still believe in lifetime relationships, and you can be kind to anybody. But who's really in your active community makes a big difference. Right? The people you see all the time, you're kind of an average of them. Right? Both in terms of their income statistically, as well as how they show up. Right? So surround yourself with people that actually support you and support you in your magic work. Right? Then, of course, flush your creativity and work with that, right? When you're fermenting things, right? And letting things sit and stewing on things sometimes and taking problems and working them, right? Also not always pleasant because we have to go there and look at our shit, literally, right? And then, of course, the distillation, right? Really looking at what's the essence here so you can bring it all back together. And that's that work that I mentioned briefly earlier of turning lead into gold, right? Of turning the prima materia or material experience here, right? The experience we have every day into something higher, into beauty, into wisdom. So what helps a little bit in that is this idea that if you keep your eyes set on your vision, like a bird, right? You're always looking towards the horizon, always focus on the vision, right? Then it's the ability to adopt new good habits and let go of habits that don't serve you any longer. Right? And as I mentioned multiple times, we are habitual creatures, so that gives us actually the stability to continue to fly, is our habits. Right? And we are not what, we are what we repeatedly do. Right? And excellence is not an act, but a habit. I think it's a little bit like that with magic, right? Because we can wish for that thing to happen, but again, it starts with do what you will. Right? We have to actually do something about that, and part of it is actually changing our habits. So a really brief one on neuroscience of habit formation. I highly recommend Huberman Labs, Huberman. Huberman Labs, he is one of the most digestible neuroscientists out there, makes it very easy. But the general thing of habit formation is if you do something new, right, the first time you do something, you're going to get some adrenaline. It's stressful, it's crazy, it's new, right? New information, right? Or something difficult, like doing push-ups. Right? But while you're doing it, if you keep telling yourself, I'm doing it, keep going, right? Then you get that dopamine, that reward. Like, for example, while you're pushing, right, and doing push-ups, and it's hard, but you're like, I'm doing this, yes, I'm doing this, right? You're actually giving yourself that dopamine in that moment. That creates acetylcholine and ultimately creates new markers for new pathways. Right? And then you need this celebration and rest where you get the serotonin to actually make the connections between those pathways afterwards. Right? But the idea is that you want to continuously program your own dopamine in particular. right? And taking a dopamine fast throughout the day because you're so used to running after things all the time. Oh, I answered this email. Oh, I looked at my things. Oh, there's something on social media. But there's always something to respond to. Dopamine, 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 dopamine. Learn how to program that yourself. Right? Have times without it, where you go quiet, and then ultimately learn how to create it for yourself in the situations that you want it. And in the whole process here, be kind, right? Be kind to yourself, first and foremost. Be kind to others. Right? Our capacity for empathy is directly related to our capacity to empathy towards ourselves. Right? So start with being kind to yourself. Being human is not an easy thing, right? Being an individual, standing out, being different is rarely rewarded, right? Most of the time people don't want people to be different, right? So that they don't have to be different, and they're actually validating their own conformity, right? So we treat the people that are different very harshly at times, right? And so to be yourself in a world that's constantly trying to make you something else is really the greatest accomplishment, as Emerson said. So be really kind to yourself, and remember that this is your legacy. As Marshall McLuhan said, there's no passengers on the spaceship Earth, there's only crew, right? This is your legacy, right? So as you're creating magic, make your magic worth it, because we have a lot to do, we have a lot of things to create in this world together. So make your legacy worth it, make your magic count. If you have questions or like to geek out on these things, I'm always interested in doing so. Here's my information if you want to get in touch. And thank you for your time and attention and watching this video, and create some awesome magic out there.